if you had a chance to meet the two men who did this to you, what would you tell them?
I think I would, at this point, you know, I would like to communicate to them the effect that their actions have had. Both traumatically in all of the people that I hurt, but also that, you know, the immense amount of good that I would not have the intensity of desire of putting out as much good as I can into the world, of undoing as much of the harm that I have done. And if that had not happened to me, like, I don't know who I would have been, but I would not be this person. And this person is someone who, you know, is just so passionately trying to live a life that has meaning and to, you know, help as many people in my sphere of influence feel deeply and truly loved as I possibly can. And I don't know that I don't think that I would have had the same level of commitment had they not chosen to violate me. So I would like to communicate both of those things to them, and just, you know, I mean, and to offer forgiveness. You know, like, you don't even know the harm that you caused. Like, you don't understand. And that, you know, that I think that that's one of the things that that we do really bad at when we utilize violence in our lives. But we don't understand that it's not just towards that one person. It's like their actions now, everyone that I encounter for the rest of my life are affected by their actions. Everyone. And therefore, everyone, you know, the lives that touch the lives of the people that I touch are affected. And it's like, that's something that I would like to communicate to them as well. But also just that, you know, that I forgive them, that I, you know, like, I understand that they, you know, and because I deeply understand that they almost definitely have their own trauma that they're dealing with, that they have their own pile of crap that was handed on to them, that you don't go around, you know, raping people and, you know, inflicting violence on other people because everything has been awesome in your life, that you get there because you feel fundamentally broken, and that, you know, and just to extend, you know, that compassion towards them, that it's like, you know, like, and if you're in a place where you haven't dealt with that or need help dealing with what you have done, that, you know, I can help connect you with that help.
You're a wonderful person. Definitely.
Not all the time. Gets me when the toddler's refusing to nap.
It takes a lot to have this kind of mindset. So let's talk about the good that you're doing right now. So you're working with several organizations. You're helping people to disengage from extremist organizations. So talk a little bit about that. How does the process work? Or in the first place, if someone wants to disengage, what are the steps to take, and then what's the process that follows after that?
Well, I'm currently working with Christian Picciolini, who you also interviewed at Free Radicals Project. And I also work with the Against Violence and Extremism Network, who's affiliated with the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, a think tank out of London. And one of the things that I'm most passionate about working on and working towards is actually building preventative programming. I just feel like we prepare our children for all kinds of stuff, that if they're, you know, if they talk to strangers, or if there's a fire, or all kinds of stuff, that we tell them what to do and what to look for. And so the idea that we are not teaching our children what it looks like to be groomed and recruited into all kinds of like hate and violence-based movements or whatever, which are also some of the same tactics that are used by people who are grooming people for human trafficking. interestingly.
Okay.
Now you're talking about the same target audience for all kinds of recruitment into all sorts of bad outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
That building the programming to just be like, hey, this is what it looks like. Here's some resiliency. Like, let's talk about what it entails to help build communities where this is where these communities and individuals are more highly inoculated against lives of violence being attractive.
Mm-hmm.
So working towards building like better preventative programming and where it's like, I believe with all of my heart that we have got to talk to our children about all of the really hard things, and that instead of seeing it as somehow stealing their innocence, trust that they're going to take what they're ready to take and view it as protecting more people's innocence for a much longer period of time. That I feel like we have got to, because when you start talking about ideas of having a voice in your own life and how, people are going to use the things that you're struggling with as, that they're going to try to provide you with what looks like this really sort of idyllic way out or whatever, that, teaching that kind of stuff. And if you start talking about race and hate and violence and utilizing violence as a solution to children from when they're very young, you're already going to have that vocabulary. You're already going to have it as a regular part of your conversation as they get older. It's already going to be, part of what they know and what they're taking away from you as an adult in their life. If you start from really young, they'll grow up. It'll be something that you just regularly talk about.
So in what way would you, if you have children at a certain age, so what would be the age that you start talking about these things, and how would you introduce them to these topics?
Well, I mean, I would start talking about them at, from when they're babies and when they're, when do you start talking to children about being taken by strangers? That's, part of it is that dynamic. Like, I don't want to make you afraid of people. I want you to inherently sort of trust people or whatever. But I do want you to understand how to be safe, that we start those conversations when people are really young. Mm-hmm. And we maybe need to have a more intentional set of conversations with our children about how violence is used. And in America in particular, we need to start intentionally speak, as particularly as white people. We have a huge responsibility to begin talking to our children about race from really, really young. Really young, 2, 3, whatever. Talking about it and talking about, the difference, is of experiences within, one culture in terms of race, because that we as white people have a very serious responsibility to work to dismantle the system that we've set up. That it's our responsibility. It's not people of color's responsibility. It's our responsibility to begin to tear that down. Start talking about that from very young. Because it's everywhere. And so heightening your awareness, from an individual perspective, heightening your awareness and educating yourself about white privilege and what it looks like and how it manifests and, and how that plays out in society and in our day-to-day lives or whatever. And just talking about it. I mean, I've talked to my kids from when they were really, really young about marketing. That it's hey, try to identify what cereal do you most want? And they'll be like, this one. I'm like, do you notice how you pointed right at it, that it's at your eye level? Mm-hmm. And it's got all your favorite characters on it from all your favorite movies. Why do you think that is? And I've made this very intentional so that they understand, you're being marketed to. They're trying to get your dollars.
And it's the reason.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so they've grown up and they're not hyper materialistic, and they're oh yeah, whatever, they're not driven by brand the same way that a lot of other people their ages are, because we've made this intentional practice of like, hey, look at where stuff is placed. Look, oh, there's that Coke can in that movie facing right at you. See that product placement or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So just simply by talking about it, doesn't even need to be some sort of like intense, like terrible thing. That if you are watching TV and you're like, oh, wow, look at that. Like those white people are depicted that way. And look at how that black person is depicted in this show. That person is depicted as, or like, the villains in Law and Order or whatever. It's like, like let's tally up how many are people of color, how many are, like how are these people depicted? How do we depict people in the media? Even just making it something like that, where it's like it sets the sort of tone for questioning. Now be prepared, because it ends up with you end up with teenagers who are questioning everything.
But as initially,
so get ready.
Also part of the internet culture, you mentioned forms habits. And
yes.
if that gets a thing, and nowadays with the internet and the communication on the internet, it's so easy to fall for this kind of hate speech in whatever form it may appear, because you don't even recognize it as such.
Yes. And so making it just an intentionality of talking about that and talking about how truth is manipulated and stuff like that. And for me, like, I think that talking about that is just part of what you talk about from very young is super worthwhile. I think more targeted preventative programming would be very well placed around early adolescence. So 11, 12, 13, right in there. And some of the things that I think would actually be really helpful would be for school systems to have a day every year where, particular age kids are bussed from all over and they have to actually sit down together. And it would be great if you could get private schools in on this as well, where you sit together and you have a reflective, structured dialogue with your peers. And there's, somebody who's like trained, a mentor at the table to help facilitate this structured dialogue. So not just like a free for all, like it's a structured dialogue with people that are your same age, but are potentially essentially unlike you. So completely different demographics, because in America, essentially schools are self-segregated. Now we talk about, segregation being over and everything, but that's not the way that it's played out. And most school districts are actually highly segregated because it's based on where you live. And so where you live is usually really, it's not super economically diverse, and it's not super diverse, like in terms of the racial makeup of people. So I think it would be really, really useful to have an experience where you have an intentional, just at least time where you have to listen to somebody who comes from a really different demographic from you. That it might not, it's not going to totally solve the problem. But, taking that experience of like, oh, I've been in this like super duper privileged school my whole life. And I just sat there and, somebody that, is supposed to be from this neighborhood where it's all gangsters and everything, just talk to me about like their mom and like, and how their mom's been raising them because their dad died and, or whatever. And his brother's in jail. And it's like, you have this humanizing experience that it takes somebody from just being an idea or a set of ideas and gives you an experience of them as a human. And I think that would be something that would be just so, amazingly helpful in so many ways. This idea of like a commitment to like learning how to have conversations.
To open a dialogue between people.
Learning how to listen to points of view other than our own. Yeah. Something like that. So I think more targeted and very specific, more specific, like, hey, do you want to be the hero of your own life? Are you looking for meaning? Are you afraid that your future isn't going to be what you thought it was? Those are the kinds of targeting ideas that people seeking to do them harm are going to use. That's the same draw into, white supremacy, the alt-right, the extreme far left can utilize those same arguments. Human traffickers can use those arguments. That it's like we should, in my opinion, that focusing on that like early adolescence stage and giving them like at least the information. Like, you can't make people use the information that you give them, but it's like, man, like, can we at least like make sure that they have that information to potentially utilize? So that would be a good age, I think, to begin.
Yeah. If in reality it's offered that's almost too good to be true, then at least question it to some degree.
Yes. Fact check that. Yes. Which is really like, well, can we just like teach everybody fact check everything ever? Like, do that.
If someone wants to disengage, they contact your organization. So what are the steps to take someone out of that reality that they're in?
Very often we're contacted not by an individual, but by somebody who is concerned about that individual. There's a point in which, like I mentioned earlier, where people are sort of untouchable, they're sort of unreachable, that they're so entrenched and invested in their ideology that, it's like you can't just be like, oh, hi, I'm an ex-neo-Nazi too. Come on out. But what can happen is that you can try to begin a dialogue with them. And this is true for, wherever people are at. The very first thing is to build trust with somebody. And that is oftentimes the longest part of the disengagement process. It's like, hey, we're just going to have conversations and I'm not going to hold judgment for you because I've been there. Like, I'm not going to hold judgment for this ideology that you're spewing, even though I disagree with it. And I can communicate like, hey, I don't agree with that at all. I can just, we're listening more than we talk. And what we're listening for in particular is the story behind the story. We're listening for those things that got this person to where they are now. And then after we've established trust and, and have been able to begin to identify, then we can begin to start to facilitate connection between that person and the resources that they need in order to start making some, because a lot of times too, it's like, well, so-and-so, whatever group of people took my jobs or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, like what jobs were you doing? And they're like, well, just the jobs. And I'm just like, okay, well, what are you qualified to do? Nothing. I dropped out of high school. Okay. Well, can we maybe talk about getting a GED or something, because that will be one step in accessing more work for you. Because what I'm hearing is that you're really afraid of not being able to provide for your family, or yourself or whatever. Like what I'm hearing you say is that you're afraid that you're not going to have access to work or, to a job that's enough to pay your bills. And usually people are like, oh yeah. It's like, if you can cut through all the bullshit, and get to well, what are you actually afraid of? What are you actually, what is this? What is the real fundamental root of this? That then you can begin addressing some of the actual needs that they have, instead of just continuing to argue and bicker about, ideology or, or whatever. It's like, okay, well, whatever. You have all that stuff that you're doing and I can't stop you from that. But I can go here and I can help you be able to, begin to piece together the things and create an environment where it will be favorable for you to turn away and disengage, and then continue to make it more and more favorable to where you are willing to do the work of healing and rebuilding your life and get to a place where you can, make amends for the wrongs that you've done. So in a way, it's very similar to what your ex-boyfriend's mom did with you, offering you an alternative reality and giving you a structure to orient yourself. Yes. And then again, it's like, something that I recognize has so much value for what she did for me was that tangible connection. That she wasn't just like, you should go to school and you should take your, that she was like, you should go to school and I'm going to physically drive you to where those resources are. That wasn't just like, you should do all these things. You should have these programs. It's like, okay, but I'm going to figure out how to get you to those resources. And so that's something that I have taken with me wholeheartedly in everything that I do. It's like, it's not enough for me to just wish you the best. Like, I've got to try to, with everything I can, facilitate the means to provide for you to get from where you are to the resources that you need. Now, the work still has to be yours. You know, it's much like recovery from, you know, alcohol or drug addiction. It's got to be your work that you're choosing to do. But I sure as heck can do everything in my power to make that as easy as possible, because it's going to be really hard. So it's like, if I can make some of the details easier, you know, it's like, then you're freed up to work on a lot of the harder stuff that's going to happen.
Okay. So how can people reach out to you and your organization, the Free Radicals?
Yeah, you can find us on freeradicals.org, and I'm Shannon at freeradicals.org. You can send us an email. There's a helpline on there. Hopefully soon we will actually have a better helpline even up and running to respond to. But for now, you can find, and you can always just Google Shannon Martinez Nazi. There's a Shannon Martinez who's like a vegan chef. So I'm sorry that I'm compromising some of your amazing creative food and all of the amazing work that you do, Shannon Martinez, vegan chef, with Shannon Martinez, ex-neo-Nazi. But you can also just Google me and find me that way, and that will, eventually lead you to a way to connect with me as well.
It's important to mention that if someone reaches out to you, that information is always being handled privately, so they don't need to be.
It's always confidential. Yeah. Yes, it is always. The only time that it is not is that if there is a threat of imminent violence to other people or to yourself. That confidentiality is set aside for those two reasons. But those are the only two.
Okay, wonderful. Jen, I know you got 7 kids waiting, so I just want to ask you 2 last questions that I ask everyone I'm talking with. And the first question is, this is a series of interviews with extraordinary people. So people who have a story and have a mission in life that inspires other people, that makes this world a better place, like you do. Who would you consider an extraordinary person that I might even talk to next?
One of the most extraordinary people with whom I have spoken and gotten to know over this last year is a woman named Shanti Hodges. And she is the founder of an organization called Hike It Baby, which encourages families to get outside with their babies and kids and hit the road and get out on the trail with them, to get them out in nature, building nature connection and healing some of our generational woes through intentionally getting out on the trail. It grew from her stumbling across some people on a trail when her son was just a few weeks old, and her asking for help to put him in the carrier that she was wearing him in, to now a worldwide movement. There's just a crazy amount of hikes hosted all throughout the world every week. And it's grown into this, worldwide movement of getting people outside and on the trail. And just, she's somebody who's like passion for what she's doing and working on, and her commitment to just relentlessly working because she can see the good that is coming, and the value is just something that I admire so deeply. And the level of immense goodness that her choice to create this movement, as she saw that it was a need that a lot of people have, it has impacted my life for sure, in the way that I have been able to try to manage and deal with, yet another baby when I thought I couldn't have any more babies, to families all over the world. And I can't help but think that the kids who are the real recipients of the greatest assets of this movement are going to grow up just to to feel, again, like this sense of community and a sense of purpose and a sense of like place in the world because their parents were committed to making sure that they got outside and get out in nature. And so she's somebody that, I so admire her. I wish I had like even just a fraction of the energy that she has.
Well, I'm sure with 7 kids, what you don't lack is energy. I still don't know where you get it. But I'll do my best to reach out to her and try to get her on the show. So thank you very much for that introduction. And my last question I always ask is, to anyone who's watching or listening, what's your final message? What's the message that's closest to your heart?
I would like everyone to walk away believing that people can fundamentally change, that it is worth investing in people, that if I, with all of my flaws and shortcomings and immense defects of character, is able to enact fundamental change in my life, that it is something that we can all do. And even though that might be scary, because that might mean that you have work to do, that you can do it, but also that it is worth investing in when you see people who are just immersed in the worst things. Listen for the stories behind their stories and believe that they are capable and have the capacity for immense change. And the corollary to that, in the times that we live in, the other thing that I feel like is really important right now is for us to not lose hope. That because I know that fundamental change is possible, because that's my life, that we have got to remain hopeful, even in the face of so many things that would steal that from us. That there's billions of dollars invested in making us hopeless. Because a hopeful people is a powerful people. A hopeful people can move mountains because we believe mountains can be moved. And so whatever comes our way, so over the next, weeks, days, months, years, to not lose hope. That hope is the most powerful weapon that we have. And it will be the thing that brings us to the world that we all hope to be living in, and for our children and our, many generations to come to live in.
Shannon Martinez, thank you for your openness, and thank you for
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Here comes the sunshine and burns away clouds like they never were.